So the way we're going to do this, I've invited our two panelists to both start by giving us roughly 5 minutes each on sort of where they see the state of the art right now. And then we'll have a conversation. And those of you who know me know I hate panels, so we're trying not to keep this canned, really turn it into a conversation. So anyway, so Bert, are you ready to go?
I hope so.
Good.
Hi, everyone. So I thought I'd just show a couple of quick videos that seems to be a really good way to start things off when we enter kind of complex technology discussion. So Scott had asked directionally sort of where I thought things might be going. So I thought I'd just show a couple perspectives from some people that are leading in the consumer side of the space, or at least making noise. So one of those is the Microsoft HoloLens. So hopefully this will play.
Look around. Technology is all around us. We use it in every aspect of our lives. It enables us to do amazing things. But what if we could go further? What if we could go beyond the screen? Where your digital world is blended with your real world. Now we can. This is the world with holograms. What will they enable us to do? New ways to visualize our work.
You know, I have an idea for the fuel tank.
New ways to share ideas with each other.
How are things going your end?
I just put the images in OneDrive.
Perfect.
More immersive ways to play. New ways to teach and learn.
So put the new trap in the place of the old one.
Now what?
And tighten here and here.
New ways to collaborate and explore the places we've never been.
Look at this formation. Let's take a closer look.
And new ways to create the things we imagine. Because when you change the way you see the world, you can change the world you see. This is Microsoft HoloLens.
So I thought that was a pretty good and interesting perspective in broad strokes of the types of things people are looking at doing with augmented reality. In that case, through a wearable, which is the head-mounted display. So another company which has made a lot of noise in the space recently is Magic Leap, which is a startup that's under the Google umbrella now, which people are very curious what they're doing. And they've just released a video a few days ago, and you can see already well over 1 million views. So that's a statement, I think. Previously, I think a lot of these things were looked at as like marketing gimmicks, and it probably wouldn't have garnered as much excitement. So this is another extreme, talking about sort of where this might go in a gaming context. It gets a little intense at the end, so we'll cut it. But you may want to take a sip of coffee first. There's a little bit of a dubstep soundtrack, and I don't want to freak anyone out, so. So it looks like I'm not getting some.
There you go.
So you probably get the idea where it's going. Various androids show up and he battles his way out of the office. But I thought this was a really good description of a sort of a more fun execution. He's not checking the weather, but it seemed really relevant to me in terms of directionally where the space is headed, because we saw he starts by looking at this video on YouTube at his desk, swipes that aside, grabs an email, gets up, decides to engage in a gaming experience. And I think those are all behaviors we've all experienced, like watching cats on a treadmill, and then somebody emails me and I get up to go to the bathroom, and then my fantasy football team. And so I thought it was an interesting look at how they've taken behaviors that we're engaging in right now and kind of commodified them in the augmented reality sense. So that was sort of my directional intro.
Thanks.
So.
That's great. So hi, I'm Eric. As I was watching that video, did any of you watch the new Community on Yahoo? So Community, which was on NBC now, has moved to Yahoo, and there was a recent episode about virtual reality, like a sort of an old virtual reality machine, and it was all about how like doing really simple things were really complex in virtual reality. So as he was checking his email by grabbing something and putting it over here, I was like, this is pretty easy, right? So I'm going to compliment to do a little bit of augmented reality here. You sort of presented some digital. I don't have any digital assets, so I will just be real here. And what I'll talk about real briefly is a little bit of the other end of the spectrum in terms of augmented reality, both in terms of spatial scale and in terms of the technology itself. So we've been working on augmented reality games here at MIT for about 10 years now. And the ones that we do are actually sort of landscape scale games. So they're games that we play across real spaces. We've played games here at MIT. We've had recent partnerships in the last several years with a bunch of zoos and gardens across the United States to build games for their sites. And we've worked with schools to have them build augmented reality games for their own sort of schoolyards. And what we provide is a set of tools for kids, museum curators, people who work in informal science education as well as science education, to develop these sort of games for their own sites. And the key thing is sort of combining the real and the virtual in sort of interesting ways. And specifically what we're interested in is like using the real space for what it is. And so there's been instances of sort of augmented reality games where you sort of play something on maybe a football field, and the football field are just boundaries to some sort of space. When we think about augmented reality, we really think about using the reality for what it is. So when we built a game about MIT, that took place here on the MIT campus, the game took place on the MIT campus. And so as you're walking around, so the game has some sort of sense of where you are, what's going on around you, and there's some digital sort of fiction that's sort of going on within the game, but it's combined with the real. So you really think about implications for, it was a game, one of the games we made was about a disease outbreak on campus. And in that case, you had to think about, well, where you were and what sort of resources you might have around you and what you might need to quarantine this building, who might come here, where might those people go. We made another one that was about a chemical spill on campus. We had to think about, okay, where does the river go? Which way does the river flow? How do things get into the river? Where might they come from? So the real space sort of represents itself. And so we're trying to think about ways that we can really combine the real and the virtual in ways that make people identify with the place that they're in and issues that that place represents. So it might be on campus, it might be about issues in the community. So we've dealt with things like global warming, disease outbreaks, environmental health, things that really affect communities. At the zoos and gardens, we've dealt with things, again, about climate change, illegal wildlife trade, endangered species. So it's about engaging people on those sites with things that they're thinking about at those different locations. And it's really about providing people with the tools to be able to do those things themselves. So we provide a toolkit that lets kids go online, pull up a map, put down different icons, draw different characters. The characters might be able to move around. There's a whole programming language associated with it. So characters can change over time or move, or different people can play different roles. And what we've really found is that sort of being at this edge of reality and fiction allows people to sort of take on new identities and do role play in ways that are really meaningful to them. It's one thing to sort of see things on a screen. It's another thing to sort of play that role in reality. And actually, the other people in the game, while there's fictional people that you run into in the game and you might see videos, there's other real people in the game who you're interacting with face to face. And it provides a sense of authenticity as we deal with these sort of real sense of problems that the students really enjoy. It also gets them out into their own neighborhoods in many cases. So we've dealt with these games both in sort of more suburban locations as well as a lot of urban locations. And in both cases, we're taking people who maybe have lived in a place for quite a long time, and we take them to places that are around the corner from their schoolyard, and they've never been there before. And so it allows the game sort of steers them out into new places that they may not have experienced before. So just another sort of sense of ways that augmented reality sort of blends that real and the digital in ways that make people think differently.
Which actually sort of lead into I both told them that the question I wanted to lead with is if we think back historically at certain moments, say the discovery of a scientific perspective in painting. Once they figured out how to paint scientific perspective, we could never look at paintings the same again. We all sort of began to see, anyone who sort of looked seriously at painting began to see perspective where they hadn't seen it before. With photography, we suddenly started to see the world differently. Not just photographs, but the whole world looked different to us because of the things that photography told us. So I know it's a big question, but how, with the emergence of AR, how might it change the way we not just deal with technology, but the way we look at the whole world? How is AR going to sort of fundamentally change our engagement with the larger world? That's sort of the question I want to start with.
So I do think some of the stuff in the video actually did bring up some interesting points about sort of seeing the invisible. And whether it's about seeing the invisible inside of a car engine or your faucet or whatever it is, in our cases it's all about seeing the invisible, which may be real or fictional in a lot of cases, but thinking about things that may not be sort of immediately apparent to us. And I think augmented reality provides us a way of engaging with that. And in the moment, we might engage it with an experience where we can see it through our digital lens. But it certainly makes us think differently about, what's the structure underlying this floor here? What's inside that computer there? It might sort of get people to sort of be thinking about how might I question the things that I can't see right now, whether they be physical things or systems that I might be able to visualize. It gives me a sense of wonder around those things I can't see.
I would say the way in which I think absolutely agree with all of those points. And I think it becomes the visual contextualization of the internet. And I think we see that a lot now with the ubiquity of cloud computing and mobile networks. Augmented reality has been around for quite some time. You might even call the first down line, when you're watching football, a sense of augmented reality. It's adaptive, it's real time, it's displaying information. But now we're able to take those networks with us in our pockets, have targets that are changing via the cloud. When you're using augmented reality, you need something to look at to engage the experience. So I think it's going to vastly change the way we visualize data. Everything from the example we saw in the video where we've all done that, called up a friend, like, how do I hook up this modem? And then all of a sudden they can demonstrate that for you. But also the way children take control of their own learning. And even going back to the ViewMaster item, that changed the way people perceived the world. When ViewMaster launched originally, like 80 years ago, it allowed you to visit places you couldn't visit. It allowed people that were in remote locations that couldn't, have cadavers, couldn't do refrigeration, could learn complex medical procedures through that. So I think it's a similar portal and way to kind of perceive things.
Can you say a little bit more about what work you're doing with kids in that space?
Sure. So we just launched a product in collaboration with Google, which is the new ViewMaster powered by Google Cardboard. I can show you a quick example of how we've used augmented reality in that. So this is the actual product with the viewer. Let's see if it'll let me do it. So you'll slide the phone in, and what's interesting here is the slide on the side here, which is when you look through the smartphone at the ViewMaster reel. So typically we had looked through the reels, right? Captured light, created depth of field through stereoscopic imagery. Now we'll look at the reels, and we use augmented reality as a menu system in this execution. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One is toys are meant to surprise and delight, and it's awesome when you see that dinosaur show up on the table and walk around. And that was, really impactful for people that were demoing the product. You can see on the right here, this was a blogger at our press event, and he was just hell-bent on getting the shot of the dinosaur eating the berry off of the... So I'm like, this is the coolest thing. He's just wanted a shot of the dinosaur. So people are still surprised and delighted by it, but what's also interesting about using this as the menu system, it makes it social. So I just had a conversation in the hallway about the isolationism behind VR and gaming. And if I put the disc on the table and 5 kids can look at it and see and experience the same thing, all of a sudden it's not this alone experience. When you're in VR, a teacher could guide you through a lesson and, now let's go to Pluto, everybody goes to Pluto, look at the orbits. So that was a big reason why we chose to use AR in this execution.
To promote the social, the collaborative.
Sociability, exactly, yeah.
I think that sense of shared space that you get when you're doing something that has both sort of a common view into it, as well as the sort of physical aspects where you have really natural ways of interacting with the other people in that space, makes it for a much more social learning experience, and I think, which makes it both more educational, I think, as well as more playful. And I think both of those are really important to think about how we design for those.
Is it possible? I'm intrigued by 2 thoughts. One is your mention of beginning to get people to actually look at the underlying systems, and also Bernie's opening, and thinking about the ways in which kids play spontaneously without much guidance. And is there a sense in what the work either of you are doing where kids are going to be able to invent the play and use it to sort of look deeply in the world? Are you seeing any of that in what you're doing?
Well, I think for our the ViewMaster product specifically is about exploration. So, user-generated content, the creation of photospheric images. I think all of that would be really enticing, especially to a digital native or a tech-savvy kid.
Say a little bit more about it. Describe that a little bit, because I think some of us don't know what that
one of the premises under which the ViewMaster operates, you'll choose which experience you want. So, say for example, you chose San Francisco. You select the location in San Francisco you'd like to visit, and then you would be transported into a photosphere. Or a Google Maps Street View type image of that. So I can imagine a kid creating a photosphere of their backyard, sharing it with their cousin to be able to explore their new treehouse, or being able to do some sort of a virtual scavenger hunt or something like that. And I think in that way they can really use this to take control of the play in a different way.
Is the technology for creating those photospheres easily within people's grasp, or what's?
There are, you can do it now. There's apps that will allow you to create a photosphere. I think to do them in really high quality, you still need some specialized equipment, but we'll get there. And I think one of the reasons why this product works today and maybe wouldn't have a couple years ago is the technology we're all holding in our pockets, which is the high refresh rate screens, which before just wasn't possible to do things like this. They were very dizzying, jarring experiences. And the cameras, we're going to have 3D depth sensing cameras in commercial mobile phones by 2017. So that's going to be a real game changer. Also for 3D image mapping, creating of 3D assets to put into augmented reality, that's going to be in the hands of everybody.
Student authoring has always been an important part of what we've done in a lot of our projects, including augmented reality, and giving kids that ownership over what they're creating. And even if it's not great, it's something that they've created themselves, and I think that's really important for them to sort of be able to share that with other people, have other people to be able to experience it, and I think that's a really nice way of thinking about the future of many technologies, including augmented reality. But I think another thing about particularly the kind of stuff that we do, which is sort of large spatial scales, which we haven't done, they can also take place at large temporal scales. So games that sort of take place that are more pervasive throughout life over the course of days or weeks. And then you could imagine that the contributions that individuals make are sort of small, but in the collective, they might be large. So someone might contribute a particular asset or a new kind of character or something like that. But as that game sort of changes and evolves over the course of days, weeks, months, the collective contributions might be quite large.
You want to just say a little bit about Tailblazer? Tell us, just because.
Sure. So Tailblazer, as I said, we've been working on these augmented reality toolkits for many years. And when we started on this, it was really complicated. You had to sort of have these special PDAs, and you had to have a GPS, and you would stand outside for about 20 minutes until you could get a GPS coordinate, and then it would sort of flake out after about a minute, and then the Bluetooth would. So you get the idea. And now, the same smartphones that are in our pockets with high refresh rates have really good connectivity. They have really good sort of location awareness. They have other kinds of sensors that kind of make for heads-up displays being really interesting as well. So we create this web-based tool called Tailblazer, T-A-L-E Blazer, and it's a tool for kids novices to create these location-based games themselves. You can bring up a map. You can put down different icons that represent different things. You can give those different behaviors. Those could be non-player characters. They could be objects that you could pick up. They could move. They could change the environment. They could send you inside. They could sort of send you a different map layer, so where maybe you go back in time and see a different map from where you are now. And then those games get deployed on smartphones. So you can send somebody a link, and they can play it on their Android or iOS phone, and then be able to play those games and share them with other people. And again, in a lot of cases, the games themselves aren't like the best games ever, but they're owned by the students, sometimes by a single student, sometimes by a team of students. And they use them to be able to convey things about their own understanding, about their own sense of issues in their own neighborhoods. And I think that attachment to what they're creating and the meaningfulness that it has to the people who are playing the game makes them really wonderful.
Mm-hmm. How young have kids been programming?
So most of the stuff that we've done is sort of grades 5 through 9 or 10. But we've worked with a colleague who's done this in elementary school where it was a class project where the students all sort of created individual assets. Maybe someone created a movie, maybe somebody designed a character within the game, and then the class collectively built the game together.
Mm-hmm. Cool. What do you worry about with AR?
I think the same things probably most of the people in this room worry about when creating content for kids. Safety is always the #1 concern, making sure that it's a safe experience, both using whatever apparatus you might be engaging with and just the content that's being presented being safe and age appropriate. I think the introduction of cloud computing in the kids space is really interesting, and we'll have probably a lot of discussion around that as a community going forward as we tackle COPA and children that are below terms of service and the ability to geolocate them and all of these complex questions that are now arising as people try to deliver these really immersive real-time experiences to a younger demographic. So, we design everything with that in mind from the ground up, so that's obviously something that's top of mind. Anecdotally, it freaks me out to think that one day my financial records or social network might hover above my head, and everybody in this room would look at me and be like,
right now.
"Oh my God, that guy!"
You mean not just the NSA will know?
Yeah, so not just the NSA, but my cab driver or whoever else. So that I think is just something we as a society will tackle with AR in general.
So
by the way, if you haven't read Gary Steingart's super sad true love story, it's a great novel, and it's a novel in which everyone walks around with their credit score above their head, and that's sort of their main, attractiveness is how good their credit score is. Yeah. Anyway,
I worry about two things. So one of them is not looking up. So as I said, we do these location-based games outside. And when we design them well, people are really engaging with their real surroundings as well as the digital content. And in fact, I typically think about that as at most 20% looking down and about 80% looking up. But there was an example, and other colleagues have other examples. When we design games poorly, we designed one game at the Columbus Zoo and Aquarium, and I was out there for some play testing. And there was a sort of a thing in front of the lion cage, and the kid was there looking at his screen trying to watch a video, and the lion couldn't have been 10 feet from him. The lion's roaring really loud. And he looks up at the lion as if to say, "Can you keep it down? I'm trying to watch this video." And we realized, okay, fail. And we thought about ways that we can sort of design the experience to engage more with even the serendipity that you have around you. The other thing I worry about is hype, and this was brought up by someone from the Google Glass project last week, I think, at South by Southwest, when they said, what was the current version of Google Glass is now on ice. And they realized one of the big things they did, that one of the reasons for the fail was they overpromised. This was a beta device sort of early on in its development cycle, and they sort of really characterized it as something that was much more sort of consumer ready. And that was sort of a mischaracterization of where it was at. So I think there's potential for that kind of thing, but we sort of need to think about where it is now, what it provides, and think about some of these issues that might come up, before they become a problem.
Yeah, the dinosaur on the table is still quite a ways from some of the stuff we saw at the outset. So. Yeah.
I mean, I take your point about worrying about safety. I tend to be one who worries more about, it's with any technology, and I'm often in the role of defending technology, but of course, we know from television, there's good television and bad television. There's good screen time and bad screen time. I guess the question that I think hangs out there is simply, how are we going to give kids things that are going to actually, as you say, get them engaging with the real world versus just zoning out and getting lost in the technology? Any thoughts at all about what principles of design or practice might actually help steer us in the right direction rather than the wrong direction?
Well, that was one of the reasons we also insisted upon as a design team to use augmented reality within the ViewMaster project specifically, was to not have this total escape, put on the thing and zone out and disappear. Another reason why we don't have a head strap as well. We want it to be short, snackable pieces of content, even some which encourage deliberately the child to pull the device away. So I think it's kind of about a solve, right? AR is a tool, just like all of these other technologies that we're all here to study and develop. And so just the same way you might decide, are lights appropriate in this play set, or is sound the best execution to reinforce the subject matter? AR happens to be a tool, and it should solve a problem. And sometimes the problem is how to make something fun. Other times the problem is a little bit more apparent. I know Brian from Selzer was supposed to join us with the Color Alive technology, which is really cool. You should check it out. The kids can do coloring using special crayons that create AR targets, and then their creations come alive. And I think what they did there was they found an observable behavior, which is this refrigerator effect. I've drawn something, I want to show it to everyone. Kids were already doing that, maybe even taking pictures of their drawings to send to grandma, and took it another step further. So if you're trying to kind of shoehorn something, I think you kind of get into a difficult place, and then you start getting into this, why are we doing this exactly? Is there a benefit here? Is there a learning benefit or whatever? So,
and I think thinking about the scale of the interactions, I think the snackable sort of the description that you just provided was a really nice one. So when we think about sort of, it's nice to be able to sort of dive deeply into that digital world for a little bit and then come back out. But the design sort of needs to not just allow for coming back out, but require it and sort of show the value of that as well. I do think it's something that I worry about, but I think it's not. I don't think it's a technology failing. I think it's a design failing. It's about the way we use it and design for it.
I think I want to know. Let's take some questions. I think it's a good time to take some questions. I may at any point choose to cut off the questions and have more conversation. That's my prerogative, but for the moment, so I saw a hand go up there first. Yeah, great. No, you're at the mic, that's fine.
So having been around the VR Goat Rodeo 20 years ago, I have a million questions about how to make this different, and the comments that you made just about incorporating it into play that exists already. But I also would sort of challenge you guys to think about the simplification of play, because one of the problems with VR 20 years ago was we were trying to get people to do things they didn't do in an environment they weren't used to. And I applaud the comments about, integrating it into play, but there's so many simple games that could be brought back. Is anybody working on that?
I mean, I'm sitting here because of ViewMaster, so I think a lot of us are working on that. I think it's a great question, and it's a great way to make these things relevant again and to breathe new life into great iconic play experiences or brands. Another example that comes to mind, sort of anecdotally, there was some recent study about the magnets, the refrigerator magnets that we all used to have, and synesthesia, and the suggestion that perhaps people were attributing certain colors to certain letters because they'd grown up with these Fisher-Price refrigerator magnets. So we did a create and learn case a few years ago, which had cards that you put under it, letter cards. You put the butterfly underneath, and the butterfly would fly away. So that's a great way to reimagine something very simple, and it just made that moment super impactful for that kid who's learning B, and B is for butterfly, and now that is a really memorable, engaging experience that they've walked away with. So I think, yeah, there is a lot of simple things to be done and a lot of cool things that can live again.
That was good.
Yeah, Jeff.
I don't.
Okay, another question. Sure.
I just missed the point you made. You made a prediction, I think, for 2017 of something that was going to be included on all mobile phones.
Depth sensing 3D cameras.
depth.
So the
sensor.
ability to actually just capture a photograph and import the object in 3D into a digital space. So not having to do this rotational scan, big kind of in-depth analysis of data, but be able to just capture him and then he can become an avatar in AR space.
Okay, so I guess I can leave this conference now. That's amazing. That's amazing.
No, you can leave it in 2 years.
Is there any longitudinal studies on how all this new high-tech, fancy 3D and all that other stuff affects the brain of a 12-month-old? I'm just thinking they're going to explode.
Well, that's a good question, and as it relates to what I'm doing, ViewMaster is 7+, so it's not by any stretch meant to sit in front of a 12-month-old's face. And I think the debate over screen time is one that will rage on. It's a rabbit hole we could easily fall into, and I think it boils down to each family and each parent and each context of what kind of decisions people make, and it's up to us as the content creators to do it responsibly.
I do think, particularly for kids under 2, I think we need to pay a lot of attention to what kind of things that they're interacting with. I think more generally, though, as we think about kids under the ages of 12, I think we shouldn't underestimate how plastic we are, so we can sort of change and adapt to new things that we haven't evolved with. But I also think we shouldn't, there's this sort of fallacy of the digital native, and there's still things that they need to learn and sort of become accustomed to, and we need to think about sort of equity issues around that as well. Who has access to these things, and what kind of affordances do they have, and how do we get it to, when it is valuable, how do we get it to more people, and when it's not, how do we sort of separate that wheat from the chaff there?
It was troubling from Allison's study to learn that parents are now using technology to reinforce gender. That's unfortunate, but I think that's a good point that you made. You had a question over there.
Yeah, this might echo some points or things you've talked about, but what do you think is the true catalyst for the AR and VR getting out of the novelty category in tech and into more ubiquitous use? Is it the hardware and VR, like cardboard? Is it new design patterns like mixing it with AR? Like, where do you guys think is really driving this to being the trend right now?
I would say the first and foremost is mobile phones and mobile computing and the ability to carry networks with you everywhere. The ability to change the data set was long sought after, being able to change the cloud, change targets via the cloud, so make different things have different meanings in terms of augmented reality. I think that was huge. I think the depth of content is going to be a big player. It was a real challenge to find good AR experiences or good VR experiences a few years ago, and that's not the case anymore. And then, of course, my opinion is personal computing, the advances in camera technology, the way that the consumer market has driven the price of those things down and made them accessible on a manufacturing scale, I think is going to be a real help.
I think the other thing is the way you interact with it. So it's not just what you see, but it's the way you interact with it. The sensors are getting better. Our understanding of the way that people interact with these kinds of things is getting better. The kinds of interfaces that we can design are getting better. The computation required to be able to do those sort of seamlessly is getting better. So, those are all sort of technocentric reasons. And I do think that it's okay to sort of have sort of iterations on that, to have some of the technology occasionally drive some of the innovation in terms of design, but then we need to let the design then lead the next generation of innovation.
Oh, I'm getting looked at. Fantastic. What do you think the future of AR is in like a social setting type of like event type of experience? You talked about, like they're at the zoo and they're looking at their one screen, and maybe they have and maybe you've up leveled now where they're looking at the tiger or the lion or whatever. But look at something like Improv Everywhere's MP3 experiment or Jane McGonigal's Find the Future event. Something that they do involve technology, but how can you take that and throw some AR into that now as well?
I think there's the sense of using AR to provide people with certain hidden layers of information that may be unique to them. provides a really interesting way to think about we sort of have different kinds of social interactions. Anything from simple games where I can see some information about you that you don't know, and I might see it about other people as well. Maybe we even think about different layers that different people see. I think there's lots of different ways that we can have privileged information be ways of usefully sort of creating interactions between people. I think about a colleague here who's now at Google, Rick Borovoy, made these things called N tags for a long time. This was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they were these sort of like little digital name tags that we would have like here. They would respond to each other when they met each other. There was all sorts of information about like what kind of things you had in common, what kinds of things you had that were different from each other. And in fact, he did some research and found, perhaps not surprisingly, that people that had sort of some things in common, but some things different were the most interesting conversations that were created. And so we can think about the ways we can use things like that and make it more seamless. I mean, those were sort of a little bit clunky at the time, but we can think about ways we can make that more seamless and more interesting and sort of really encourage more human-to-human interaction in ways that for some people comes very naturally and for other people does not.
How do you see that as like, do you see the AR even taking a step further into a big, huge event type of thing, like with the MP3 experience being so big, or I think the Final Future with Jamie Guy had like 500 people that were all interacting with each other on a larger scale than just a person-to-person interaction.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these events were events with like hundreds of people in one place, and so certainly at that scale, could there be something at a college campus as well? Probably, yeah. I think in a lot of ways that might be actually really interesting to think about ways that we can break down sort of perhaps existing social structures or a lot of larger institutions where people sort of see each other a lot but maybe not make those connections. And some of those experiences might be able to help people make more connections outside of their sort of small social circles.
Yeah, maybe it's related. When I watched the video by Microsoft, I felt like Jacques Tati at the time when he did that movie about high-tech homes. Yeah. And I thought it's like hell. If this all comes true, it's going to be like hell. So my question is, can you give us examples of types of ads that you would do in order to promote your products that wouldn't feel like hell to somebody who is interested in children's play, in learning and not just education, in actually enjoying something and not just being feared or afraid, and also thinking of scenarios that may be different than saving the planet from going into apocalypse or entering an army to save some species. I would just like to know if you have some examples that could also speak to people who are actually interested in playfulness and in learning and in environments that actually allow to possibilize in different way and not just these sort of apocalyptic or absolutely hellish scenarios.
You want to take that one?
Some concrete examples.
No, there are none. No. And in the work that we do, it's really about addressing real issues for kids that they. What? Sorry. Anything. So the kids that we deal with are middle school, mostly middle school students. It can be anything about access to healthy food in their neighborhoods. It can be about water quality in a nearby lake. It can be about traffic or social issues in their community. But they're issues that they generate themselves and want to explore and actually have a viewpoint on that they want to be able to communicate to the community. And they use these tools to be able to create expressions of the way they think maybe either the problem is manifest or perhaps the solution to that problem. And by having other people experience that through augmented reality, it's an interesting tool for them to be able to sort of convey their perspectives about those issues to other people in the community. And those could be their peers or they could be adults, depending on the way that they think about it.
And I think there's a contextual piece, which is, you've touched on something very interesting surrounding augmented reality in general, is this perception, I think, leading even to today, which is that it is a marketing gimmick, right? So you use the word advertisements. that certainly was an advertisement for a Microsoft set of products. However, he was simply ingesting information. He looked at the weather, he watched a game. I'm talking about an alphabet learning case, which seems moderately hellish in my view. So I think it's about the type of content we deliver specifically, as you've said, and I think there are some perceptual challenges with anything that is leading or bleeding edge in terms of adaptation and privacy concerns and all of these kind of similar debates we enter in conferences like this. And again, I think it's also on the parents, the families, the children to decide things that they do or don't want to be ingesting through the medium.
I think you make a good point. And I think if we look at the history of it, frequently the people who first create the technology don't always figure out what the most human applications are. So the earliest promoters of computers in classrooms thought of computers as teaching machines. But over time, people like Seymour Papert showed up and figured out that the ways in which computers were just tools that were going to advance what we all wanted to do anyway, which is really to play. And I actually know, we can't show enough of it. I know that the work, certainly I know Eric's work, and from I've been able to see yours, is extremely playful. I think so sure, a lot of the people selling the technology will sell it in the most inhumane ways. And I think it's incumbent on us, particularly by putting it in the hands of kids as quickly as possible, to figure out what the humane ways of using it are. Well, as a final thought, I wonder how many people in watching the Microsoft video, among the most memorable things was the little puppy dog at the very end. Yeah, right? So I guess all that is to say is that sort of what's real and organic is never sort of, that's always going to be the thing that really holds our attention best. And those of us developing ought to not lose sight of that as we do this work. So
one last question.
I have a question for Bert. We think that the new ViewMaster is a great example of expanding the definition of play in the best, in the best traditions of the toy industry, right? Really innovative, right time, right place. We were talking about that before. Where do you think toy brands are going to go next? Focusing on toy brands, not the technology of AR, but sort of,
I think that's a huge question.
So I want a huge answer.
Yeah. The future. I think there is opportunity, again, as someone else also brought up, and you can see by the successfulness around the buzz around ViewMaster, there's an opportunity in these nostalgic brands. I was just at a dinner yesterday with our friends who have a 15-month-old who's wearing a Star Wars t-shirt. So obviously she has no idea why it's so cool that she has an Imperial Walker on her shirt. She can hardly walk herself. So I think that's just a statement to the fact that the parents bought that. The parents, are still guiding a lot of the purchase decisions. So I think where we can go next is also a place that we've been, which is an interesting kind of way to look at it. And I think a place where we can go next is encompassed in the general sentiment of this talk, which is to layer in these technologies, layer in these play experiences, layer in these educational opportunities in ways that are impactful, meaningful, and engaging. That's always been the holy grail of toys and games, right, is to engage, to impact, and to surprise and delight. So I think if we could keep that focus around the technology, that's viable open water.
Winnie just did that. Sorry.
But it was really subtle, so.